Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the day 2 of Bombay Chamber Sustainability Conclave. To kick off proceedings for today, may I invite our Senior Vice President, Nilesh Shah, to deliver the welcome address. Nilesh bhai. Yeah, Nilesh bhai, over to you. Please go ahead. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 2 of Bombay Chamber Sustainability Conclave. To kick off proceedings, may I invite our Senior Vice President, Nilesh Shah, to deliver the welcome address. Nilesh bhai.
Good evening, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to begin the day second of Sustainability Conclave target net zero. As corporate India, we need to be part of solution rather than part of problem. Bombay Chamber's Sustainability Conclave has decided to bring best of the minds in India to discuss how corporate India can adopt and sustain sustainability concepts. Yesterday, we had good panel discussion on how sustainability makes business sense, how sustainability needs funding, and today we are going to discuss how technology can drive sustainability and how making net zero real is so critical. I would also like to extend hearty welcome to Shri Bhupender Yadav, Honorable Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Labour and Employment, Government of India.
Me? My voice is clear?
Yes, sir.
May I start?
Sir, if you allow me 2 minutes to introduce yourself, that will be great.
Sure.
Shri Bhupender Yadav, Honorable Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Labour and Employment, Government of India. Distinguished speakers, past presidents, members of Bombay Chamber Board, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. I would like to express my heartiest welcome to each one of you on the second day of Sustainability Conclave, Target Net Zero of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. At the outset, on behalf of the Chamber and my own behalf, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our speakers for accepting our invitation and gracing this event for meaningful discussion on this important topic. Our special thanks to Kpmg India, Bayer Group, Ambuja Cement and Avana Capital for supporting this event. I would also like to thank Anjali Bansal, President, Mr. Anirban Ghosh, Chairman of the Sustainability Committee, and our own DG Sandeep Khosla for putting efforts to make this conclave successful. Let me now introduce you to our keynote speaker for today, though Shri Bhupender Yadav, Honorable Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Labour and Employment, Government of India, needs no introduction. But I will be failing in my duty if I don't speak about few words. Shri Bhupender Yadav serves as the Union Cabinet Minister of Labour and Employment, Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Shri Yadav holds bachelor's degree and Bachelor of Laws degree from Government College, Ajmer. Shri Yadav, in his distinguished career, has served in various positions in Bharatiya Janata Party as well as various other organizations. He has also been member of various parliamentary committees and he chaired Joint Committee on Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2015. He has also co-authored a book on forest conservation in India. Without much ado, I request Shri Bhupender Yadav to share his thoughts with this august audience.
Thank you very much. Dear member of the August gathering, let me begin by thanking Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry for inviting me to this event and extending the opportunity to speak on Sustainability Conclave Target Net Zero. When we are discussing this topic, we know that at a present time, when planet was inhabit faces an existential crisis, there are no two views about the fact that we need innovative, scientific, and urgent steps to secure our planet for the generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, the science of climate change, particularly the recent IPCC report, has established that planet has already crossed 1 degree centigrade heating from the pre-industrial period. If the world continues to move on the current path, we will face at least 3 degrees of global heating by the end of the century. Therefore, we need to act decisively now to achieve net zero emissions and arrest any additional temperature increase. Our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji has launched the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative during COP26 to ensure availability of clean energy from a worldwide grid everywhere at all times. Building on this, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji announced India's contribution to enhance climate commitments, Panchamrit, including our commitment to reach net zero by 2070. India's announcement of net zero is a major step, considering our country is not the cause for climate change and has not been a historical contributor to the greenhouse gas emission. India believes that in order to reach net zero globally, developed countries should take the lead initiative as per the provisions of Paris Agreement. We have used COP26 and other multilateral platforms to urge developed countries having capacities, high per capita emission as well as historical responsibilities to undertake more aggressive steps to reach net zero. Having said that, India as a responsible global power realizes that only collective global action can help combat climate change and challenges. As the world gears up to transition toward a net zero economy, our Honorable Prime Minister has provided the world with a key mantra during COP26, and that is life. Lifestyle for environment conscious lifestyle, focusing on the mindful and deliberate use of resources. India has been pursuing a gradual transition toward net zero by striking a balance between objective of ecology, economic development, and sustainability. India's transition towards net zero is governed by the country's ambitious plans of transforming of renewable energy, including hydrogen, energy efficiency measures, sustainable transport, forest and biodiversity conservation, and promotion of sustainable lifestyle. In this direction, our climate change actions are guided by the framework of National Action Plan on Climate Change with sectorial missions covering key priority sectors of the economy, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, agriculture, urban habitat, Himalayan ecosystem, water, and forests. Private sector plays an important role in our journey towards net zero. That's the reason I am also appealing the Bombay Chamber that your actions, resources, capacity to innovate, and greater reach are vital to swiftly decarbonize sectors, infrastructures, value chains, and the product and services they provide. Since bulk of emissions comes from industries, any climate action will need to reduce or offset emissions that emerge from the industrial and commercial activity. However, private sector players are already playing a key role in this climate fight, as rising number of companies have announced net zero ambitions over the last year, with 64 Indian companies having pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And there is a one collaboration is also at international level where the India and Sweden make a one forum, lead IT. In that forum, so many industries, governments comes together. How do we more and more work on the green and clean energy? On that function, that forum is working. Climate action will not only transform industries, but also reshape how investment choices are made and where money flows. higher capital is expected to be directed toward companies at the forefront of the climate transition, with reduced financing for companies lagging behind. Transition to net zero is relatively easier for companies operating in service sector, as they only need to change their energy source to renewables and cut most of their emissions. Hence, by making more efficient use of energy across its operations, expanding use of renewable energy sources and working with supply chain partners, service companies will be able to reduce emissions. The net zero challenge is bigger for companies that are largely coal powered and contribute more than half of our country's emissions. Hence, in order to meet net zero target, such firms would need to increasingly invest in renewable sources and newer technology to reduce emissions. For sectors such as the metals and cements, wherein emissions are an inherent part of the production processes, companies would need to adopt an internal carbon pricing by putting a price to every unit of carbon emitted by them to utilize the proportionate money and fund for green investments. In light of the above, I earnestly request private sector and the business fraternity to make the best possible use of this opportunity to invest in climate technologies and expand the use of renewable energy sources in our combined pursuit to achieve a net zero economy. The Article 6 market mechanism has been agreed upon in the recently concluded COP26. This Article 6 related with the carbon market. We have made sure that unsold credit from CDM regime are transited to the new carbon market mechanism of post-2020. And that was a big negotiation of our country in the Glasgow summit. In the coming days, the operational framework of International Article 6 market mechanism as well as domestic framework will be worked out in detail to facilitate participation of all stakeholders. We are also encourage the industry's bodies and sector to prepare roadmaps for the low carbon emission pathways and implement them. The Indian cement industry has exhibited pioneering measures and achieved one of the biggest sectorial low carbon milestone across the world. The Indian industry partner have already undertaken ambitious actions, including voluntary commitment in the areas of renewable energy use, energy and resource efficiency, low GHG pathways, and other environmental protection measures. There has been a greater synergy of India's climate policy with the action and commitment of its private sector. We must ensure that sustainable lifestyle and climate justice are the core of this journey. I am hopeful that with active cooperation from the private sector, India will be able to reduce carbon emissions and achieve net zero target to build a more environmentally sustainable planet. और मैं अंत में एक और बात कहना चाहूँगा। किसी ने कहा है कि ये ग्रह हमें अपने पूर्वजों से उत्तराधिकार में नहीं मिला है, हमें अपने बच्चों से उधार में मिला है। इस प्लैनेट को हमें आने वाली जनरेशन को क्लीन और ग्रीन सोप पर जाना है। इंडस्ट्री इसमें योगदान करेगी। I would like to conclude by thanking you for being such a patient listener. Thank you very much.
Honorable Mantri Shri Bhupender Yadav ji, thank you so very much for accepting our invitation. We are so honored and grateful that you could join us today. और जो आपने जो बातें कही हैं उनसे हम सबको खूब ही इंस्पिरेशन और एनर्जी मिलेगी, और द रिन्यूएबल काइंड ऑफ कोर्स. When we think about the coming together of industry, civil society and government and policy, Bombay Chambers Sustainability Conclave, this is our first conclave, which we started yesterday. We had a number of very good deliberations with industry leaders. Today we are continuing, sir, with your inspiring words. and we will take it into the area of new technologies as well. We are conscious that industry has a role to play, common citizens have a role to play, and in partnership with government and policy, sir, with your leadership and also with the inspiring words of our Honorable Prime Minister at COP26 and the Panchamrit model, वो 5 चीजों को लेके सब साथ चलेंगे, then we will be able to create a future for our planet, which as you rightly said, वो अधिकार नहीं है, वो उधार है हमारे ऊपर. So thank you once again. We are very grateful for you having joined us today and taking time out from your very busy schedule. And in the months to come, we will seek opportunities to collaborate with your team and to work on confluence measures for a more sustainable business model as well as a more sustainable society.
Thank you very much for your word of appreciation, and our ministry is very open to receive any good suggestion from industry. We are very open. Whenever you have a very good suggestion, please send to our ministry. We are ready to discuss and deliberate on your suggestions in future also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A real thought-provoking address by the Honorable Minister. May I now invite Mr. Narayanan Ramaswamy, Kpmg Impact Champion for India, for a fireside chat with Mr. Arun Kumar, Chairman and CEO, Kpmg India. The topic which they're going to speak on is the evolving ESG landscape in India. So, over to you, Narayan, or Nana as he's called.
Okay, good evening. Thank you so much, and I hope you all can see me and hear me. Wonderful, and thank you, Bombay Chamber, for giving us this wonderful opportunity. I don't think we could have asked for a better platform or, for that matter, a better topic. It is indeed a pleasure to be a part of the BCCI Sustainability Conclave, and it's only contextual that we deliberate about achieving net zero, a topic that is very relevant for all the stakeholders, government, business community, and civil society at large. The ESG agenda, which is our topic, is in fact a much wider canvas. It goes beyond even net zero, and tracing it origins to the seminal work Who Cares Wins championed by the late Kofi Annan. Today ESG is a boardroom agenda. Arun, as you know, I'm fresh from the global impact discussions that KPMG is pursuing worldwide. And I'm thrilled at the kind of initiatives that a global firm like KPMG has taken. Like, for example, the decarbonization hubs that being planned across, I think, is a solution to help the local firm, and also new digital tools, like the Honorable Minister also talked about how digital technologies need to be used. A climate IQ tool that will help identify opportunities and risks, I think, is in the right place. And also the massive collaboration with the University of Cambridge and New York Stern to sensitize people on this, many major initiatives. Apart from that, the global alliances, we can't fight this alone, and teaming up with the likes of Google, Microsoft, and ServiceNow, I thought was a great initiative, and I'm personally very excited to be the champion for India, where along with these players, we are also going to offer these solutions here. Most importantly is the voices for a sustainable future, where we'll bring in concerns of various people and platform together. So I'm very excited, not just to be a part of this, but also to make a little difference that we can, in this field. As you know, COP26 summit has provided the much needed fillip to the ESG agenda. India has made some really far-reaching commitments as a part of this, as you know. But independently, we've been pursuing our own initiatives as well, from a compliance perspective more. Where do you think the India Inc. is positioned in terms of our ESG readiness and for achieving net zero as per our COP26 declarations? Arun?
Yeah, no, thanks, Nana. No, but first, let me just compliment the Bombay Chamber and Anjali on this very important conference focusing on an extremely important topic. So thank you, and thanks for allowing us to participate. So Nana, you really touched on many issues. I compliment you for your participation on the Kpmg Impact. So for those in the audience, Kpmg Impact is a global initiative to focus the entire firm, both inwards for ourselves as well as for our clients, on the importance of ESG. So this has been launched globally. We're a firm of 220,000 people. So just imagine the power if we can all carry the message of ESG to our clients. The way we see this in KPMG is that ESG is going to be as transformative as digitization. So digitization, especially the last 2 years, digitization has had a great fillip. Now, in many senses, you can think about the pandemic itself as an environmental issue. It's something that affects all of humankind. We're all in this together. We have seen how uneven distribution of vaccines has resulted in increased danger to everyone. So the whole ESG agenda tells us that we are on one planet, and as the minister very interestingly explained, the whole issue of temperature change is one planet. We're in this thing together. So we all have to act together. So in that context, all of us acting on the ESG agenda is going to be really important to save prospects of humankind, but also to make sure that each of our businesses and our individual welfare is enhanced. So it's a very big initiative, and we as a firm are very focused on it. We see that our clients will be very focused on it. They are focused on it. So we are going to, and coming to Nana's question about how are we positioned on ESG readiness in India, I think we're all in the early stages. Certainly in India, we're the early stage. In most parts of the world, we're at fairly early stages. However, a number of initiatives have come together, some under the World Economic Forum, to get a common understanding of how are we going to track progress on ESG. So the big four have been involved, other firms have been involved to come up with to create common ground on measuring progress. Once we've come up with the metrics, how do you set goals? How do you track them? So that's the overall picture. Now, how do we see this going forward? We think it'll go through many phases. The first one, first of all, is like an awareness phase, an awakening phase, if you might, where people have to learn to understand that this is an issue. Now, the COP26 meeting just recently in Glasgow was again very helpful in reminding the world that this is an important issue and everybody needs to do something about it. It's not just one country's issue or two countries. Everybody has to. So that first one is awakening. And every stakeholder, not just governments, the private sector, other entities. So I think we are right now in that first phase, an awareness phase, people understanding what they should do. This will be followed by an adoption phase, which regulation will drive. So we are at the early stages of that. And in India, SEBI has come up with the business responsibility and sustainability reporting approach. The Ministry of Company Affairs, Corporate Affairs has come up with a way to focus on looking at many themes like sanitized value chains, labor welfare, gender equity, fairness indices. So these have to do with the S of E, S, and G, and some have to do with the E of ESG. I think supply chain is going to be a key one. If we are focused on net zero, it's not just about our entity being net zero, it's about the entire supply chain being net zero. So what we procure should be procured from net zero enterprises. So supply chain is an area we think will go through a lot of transformation for multiple reasons. Alongside the ESG imperative, there's also the imperative of not being overly dependent on a single source of supply. This became evident when we had the US China trade war, so to speak, that suddenly it was clear you cannot have overwhelming dependence on one country. So there are, both ESG and supply chain redundancy are driving a transformation of supply chains around the world. So ESG will be very transformative in that area. So then once we've gone through that adoption phase driven significantly by regulation, but in the supply chain area, but more than regulation, we'll get into some kind of a phase where ESG is part of business reality, where we every time we buy something, we're going to make sure that it's coming from a carbon neutral source and so forth. So it becomes part of the way we do business. And that's where I think we should get to fairly soon, over the next, say, 3 or 4 years. After that, it may be an area of how do we realize more potential out of ESG. Alongside all this, there will be many companies and non-corporate organizations looking at what can they do to contribute to the ESG agenda. There are many, many business opportunities. We're already seeing that in electric vehicles, for example, the big transformation going on. So there will be huge opportunities unlocked by the focus on ESG. And that will there'll be new wealth creation occurring because of that focus on industries that help improve ESG or improve the environment in particular. So I think we are entering a very exciting stage. We are the stage 1, we're like at the awareness phase now, but very soon we'll be clipping through the next few phases. Generally, a very exciting area to be in. It's not just an exciting area, it's an important area. As the minister said, it is an imperative. We all have to do something about it. As corporations as citizens need to contribute to making a better place. And a very important area is in the area of ESG. So back to you.
Thank you so much. I think you put it very nicely in terms of the journey that corporates and, for that matter, all parts of the society go through when they, adopt ESG. And as you rightly said, I'm just paraphrasing, the initial phase is going to be the tough one, where you understand what ESG, you adopt to them. And as you rightly said, you move on to the third or fourth phase is when perhaps the benefit of this, those organizations, maybe we're not talking about new business practices, maybe we are talking about even new businesses emerging out of it. And India, as one of those young economies and in a rapid growth phase, I'm sure is going to be one of the big beneficiaries of ESG, and the world that has changed into the new order where ESG underpinnings is going to be the most important factor for doing global business. We emerge as leaders. And I'm also glad you kind of took the E part, the S part, and the G part, and the importance of all these three going together. While E has a lot of visibility, it's equally important to have the S and G part, particularly in emerging economies. Fantastic. Thank you so much. But in the immediate term, there is this notion, I'm calling it notion because in my mind also I'm not sure whether it is right, that the journey, particularly towards net zero, is going to slow down the growth agenda. And countries like India, many of the business corporates are a bit worried that would the ESG agenda slow our growth? What are your views? What do you think? Like, is it?
The natural reaction of any business or any individual to a new regulation will be, my gosh, this regulation is going to cost us more. And to some extent, initially, there is an increased cost of tracking it and complying with it, etc. But there's another way of looking at it. So take a very simple example. What is the one thing that all of us in businesses can do to help impact the environment in a positive way. One is to reduce the amount of travel, but the amount of emissions created by especially airline travel is huge. Just imagine if all of us travel less, it would be a very tangible contribution. Now that also is going to be a tangible contribution to the bottom line because we're going to spend less money getting on a plane, staying in a hotel, as I'm doing right now. So actually there will be many benefits, and those resources can be plowed into growth. So I don't buy this. I don't buy the theory that ESG, new regulations, greater cost, lower growth. No, on the contrary, because ESG essentially is about sustainability, about consuming less resources. If you can meet the same end goals with less resources, is that not a good thing? That's about economic efficiency as well. So I believe that ESG, and this is why ESG is going to be transformative. This is why, like digitization, it's going to be transformative. It's going to really release resources that can be well applied. At the same time, it will help create a better planet.
Wonderful, Arun. That's a refreshingly new perspective and it's indeed very encouraging. And I'm sure if we drive the ghosts away, where any new regulation, as you rightly said, is only going to be a burden, but start looking at, the innovation, the frugal spending and other things that gets associated with ESG, less of consumption of some of these valuable resources and more of improving the efficiency for doing that, in some sense is actually going to encourage businesses to be more profitable and also sustain for a longer time, which comes automatically, and hence the valuation and all these firms and other things are only going to increase. Absolutely wonderful the way you put it. ESG, in fact, is going to be a force multiplier, and for emerging economies like India, maybe this is a golden opportunity to become a lot more valuable, and particularly for businesses, it's going to be a great initiative. Fantastic. As we get into heightened consciousness, and of course, we'll work towards making ESG and net zero compliance as a part of our growth. And in times to come, I'm sure we'll be leader in the ESG space as well. My last question, how do you believe organizations such as Kpmg, those who are in the advisory, audit, and such kind of roles, how can we help, particularly in India, in the evolving ESG landscape, and how do you think we can benefit the corporate world at large? And of course, the government who's trying to make things happen.
So multiple ways. One is that as this becomes an issue for every company, both driven by regulation, but also by awareness, by the fact that the changing demography, the millennials, they're all very focused on working in corporations or places that are sensitive to these kinds of issues. We also have trade discussions, like, for example, in the trade arena, the importance of environmental standards is going to be part of high quality trade agreements. And the importance of labor standards, which comes to the S and the G part, they also are going to be part of high quality trade agreements. So today we are seeing there is new trade agreements happening. There is the RCEP, there is the CPTPP, the European Union is negotiating multiple trade agreements. All of these will eventually have standards that are essential, that will advance the ESG agenda. So corporations really have no choice but to embrace these and to be ahead of the curve. So a firm like ours, we can advise our clients on what they need to do, what they need to do to comply with regulations, like the SEBI regulations to start with, but other regulations that will come along the way. We can do that. Secondly, we need to set the example. We ourselves are committed to become a net zero organization. So we have to walk the talk. I think we can show how to do that. But I think it's an area that needs expertise. And that's where we come in. Our business is to take expertise to our clients, because every client cannot afford to build expertise in every area. And this is an area where we can pull together our expertise from multiple disciplines, whether it's accounting and auditing and measuring, or operational issues like supply chain management, or people management, or digitization. All these things we can bring together to help companies advance along the ESG agenda. So there's a lot we can do, and then a lot we're already doing, and that's what we're proud. We're already doing a lot of this.
Thank you so much, Arun. Thanks so much. And you also touched upon what KPMG is doing both as business and as well as the citizenship initiatives where we are racing towards net zero, perhaps faster than what others are, and rightly so, because charity begins at home and we need to prove that we ourselves are compliant and doing this. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, Arun is perhaps the most appropriate person to do this. He started his career in corporate India, then moved on to corporate US, was with the government, been with consulting. So he's seen all sides. So Arun, thank you so much for your rounded perspectives. And also thanks for giving that very optimistic and almost on a note that says that this is going to be a fillip to growth rather than the other way that many people are making out. This is very interesting and very useful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for the conversation. And thank you, Anjali and
Thanks, Anjali. Back to you.
Welcome to the next conversation in the Sustainability Conclave. Thank you, Mr. Arun Kumar and Mr. Narayanan Ramaswamy, for your wonderful fireside chat. Let me welcome you all for the panel discussion on making net zero real. We know now that climate change is real. We don't need to discuss that anymore. Tackling climate change requires getting to net zero, and that is getting more and more established. The path to net zero, however, is not easy, and a lot of obstacles must be overcome. That is why conversations on making net zero real is the need of the hour. The moderator for today's conversation is Mr. Siddharth Sharma, Group Chief Sustainability Officer, Tata Sons, and joining him in the conversation will be Mr. Sunil Mathur, Managing Director and CEO of Siemens Limited, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Senior Vice President, Bombay Chamber and Group President and MD, Kotak Mahindra AMC, V.S. Parthasarathi, coach, mentor and entrepreneur, formerly Group Chief Financial Officer and President of the Mahindra Group and member of the Group Executive Board, Mr. Rajiv Anand, Deputy Managing Director, Designate, Axis Bank. Mr. Mathur, Mr. Shah, Mr. Parthasarathi, Mr. Anand, welcome to the conversation. Over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, Anirban, and welcome to all the panelists today. I think it's my pleasure to be moderating a discussion as important as this, because we are talking about making COP26 real. And we have about 45 minutes, and I have some conversation points that I intend to ask our panelists. So I'll try and see that if there are any questions, please kind of put them in the chat box. If we are able to take them, if we have the time, we definitely will. Otherwise, address them to whichever panelist you want, and we will try and get back to you on the responses. And let me begin with the big question, because when India went into COP26, I think a lot of on the policy side, we were looking at climate finance, and we were not looking at making an announcement, because up till now, India has not made announcements about an intention to go net zero by a particular date. Now, the Prime Minister, of course, made a very bold and a very ambitious statement, a set of statement which comprised 5 elements, where he went into the long range, which was 2070 carbon neutrality, and then he also had intermediate targets for the country as a whole. And I think I would like to start with Sunil. In terms of that, looking at this very ambitious broad sweep that the Prime Minister has made, also given the fact that India historically has been responsible for only 4% of the emissions, with 17% of the population, do you really think, Sunil, that it's something achievable, it's something that we'll be able to do, or is it something that we have bitten off more than we can chew?
So thank you, Siddharth, and it's really a pleasure to be here at such a critical time in history, particularly when one looks at the entire story of decarbonization. I do believe, Siddharth, answering your question specifically, I do believe that the target of 2070 is realistic. I think the bigger challenge, though, is meeting the targets of 2030 and the milestones over there. And you mentioned rightly that we are only 4% of the global carbon footprint there. But I think it is really critical for each one of us to play our role in this. As we grow, we will need more energy. As we grow, our carbon footprint will grow. And we need to be very, very careful how we actually grow, whether we can do it in a sustainable manner and really be a part of the global citizenship over here and play our role, because this is an imperative. And I think it is important for each one of us to recognize that this is not really an issue of which country or which economy for that matter, but it is something where each one of us will have to play our role, be it government, be it civil society, be it industry in totality. So I think we will have to break this down into smaller bite-sized chunks over here and not look necessarily only at the long-term strategy, but really work backwards from there and say, what is the maximum that we should do? Not what we believe we can do, but how much can we stretch ourselves to really, in all three spheres, government, civil society, and industry, to really start making an impact on this. And there's a lot that can be done here. I'll stop there, Siddharth, but I really believe that the 2070 targets are achievable, but we need to get bite-sized chunks and get really real about the 2030 targets.
Thank you, Sunil. I think there's, and before I proceed and I kind of join the conversation in with you and others again, I would request, because this is a pure conversational play that we are having, any one of you has any comments to make on what Sunil has said, please feel free to come in. And I would just kind of say that, India, we have not at the moment, of course, this is the big vision. This is the goal that the Prime Minister has announced, and we'll have to see how the government proceeds forward in terms of the strategies and the implementation path. But for me, a point where we need to really apply our mind is that there are multitudes of people here who we are lifting out of poverty. We have our developmental needs. There is going to be reliance on fossil fuels. We are nowhere close to peaking. And, so therefore, that represents a big challenge as we move ahead. That how do you cater to your developmental requirements while at the time you grow sustainably? And Partha, may I ask you to come in and throw some light on that?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here on this panel. And in a sense, I'm at that cusp where it's easy. On one side, I'm not part of the corporate, and the other side, I'm not part of any sector per se. So it kind of becomes philosophical to some extent. So going back to what Sunil said and kind of building on it, if you ask that, have we bitten more than what we say, is that it's almost like the dialogue from Sholay. Ab bol hi diya to dekh lenge. So I think it is also required. That kind of passion is required from from this country. Yeah, because we have to surpass ourselves in order to give a better future for the next generations to come. And I think that's a reasonable alternative. The next thing is that if we kind of look at what we are doing, you have a vision or a dream, and then you do some action. Then go and say, I have a right to have this dream and a bigger dream, and therefore we do. And as we did what we did in the solar sphere gives us a right to have this dream. And now we will have to, like Sunil said, break it up. I just wanted to give one example in the social sector, and then I will go back to come back and answer more question. I was working with the SEVA, which is a self-employed women's association, a 50-year-old organization, and we're trying to say, how do we make rural green? And we said, listen, we want to think about biogas, green coal, solar electricity, solar pump, waste to energy, clean water, village processing centers, and so on. So everything which will kind of say the ecosystem starts to come in as an urban area, and therefore you can bring down the whole carbon footprint dramatically from whatever it is. In the salt pan, as I drove down, which is only consisting of the Chota Ran of Kutch, now I see 70% of the salt pans are worked by solar water pumps and solar powered things, right? This is a big change, where last time when I went, it was 70% diesel pumps. So the entire ecosystem has completely changed. So, and the other one is farm to fork, where they have said farm to fork is not rural to urban. It's not going to the dinner table plate in an urban setup, but it's rural to rural, farm to fork. So, and I think by doing smaller supply chains, we are already seeing, do we have everything everywhere? The answer is no. We have some of this in many places, many of them together in some places, and all of them maybe in one place more as a work in progress. But this is the future state of things to come, Siddharth. And therefore, if we do things like that in every sphere that we talk, then we can have, these targets maybe surpassed, not quite met.
Siddharth, I think if I can jump in there.
Please, Rajiv, please.
I think, the point that you made and the point that Partha is making as well, there is no need for us to look at sustainability and development as mutually exclusive. What is actually going to happen is that significant direct and economic gains through these climate actions are going to happen. Millions of new jobs are going to get created in sunrise industries. Resource efficiency, energy consumption efficiencies are going to kick in. So as we think about ROI of sustainability, I think we should certainly take some of these into consideration as well. So I think the whole narrative that sustainability is at the cost of development, I think to my mind is a bit flawed.
No, I completely agree with you, because it can't be seen as a binary.
Yeah.
And I think the other point that I always raise when we talk about sustainability is that you also have to weigh the cost of taking action vis-a-vis the cost of not taking action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you see, one of the things I was just seeing that I read a very interesting article which talked about the fact that, between India, China, and Japan, in 2020, the economic losses on account of natural disasters were $487 billion. Now, the cost of not reacting to the impacts of climate change are things that we have to factor in. And so we always say that it's high time that when you are framing strategy for organizations, sustainability has to be at the core. And sustainability or profitability and sustainability and development at the macro level cannot be seen as exclusive in nature. So I think that's a very valid point that you make, Rajiv.
Siddharth, can I also come in on a little bit on the point that you made? If you go back a little back, and maybe go back maybe 20 years or maybe 30 years, you would say quality or cost. Yeah, it is no more even debated its quality or cost. It is inherently assumed that better quality with cost consciousness, right? So both of them, it is the and economy. Now, the same thing has to follow in the sustainability and development area. And Rajiv is in a sense kind of, said that. And that's what you're also mentioning, Siddharth. And that's what we have to build in. It cannot be a separate thing that we first destroy and then start to somehow make amends. Now we have to say, how do we inbuild that we will not destroy as we grow? And I think that's the new, that's when, when I said green coal, I started laughing when somebody gave me this concept. This is saying green coal means what? Coal is always carbon, and green coal is zero carbon. So how do we start to use that in a production, and therefore avoid mining coal to the extent that it's being used here. So just to build on what both of you said.
And I think, Partha, the issue over there, particularly with regard to the point that you made, Siddharth, about the cost of not doing it. Let's take a very clear example here in India. Cities create a huge amount of waste. This waste is piled up outside the cities, and you get mountains of it. You get a whole lot of pollution coming out because it's continuously being burnt there. You have health-related issues there and so on. But there are technologies now that convert waste to energy. And the question really is, we've got to be examining the entire concept of waste to energy from a completely different angle. The total cost of that is not going to be the same as the cost of a conventional coal-fired power plant. And I think these are costs that we've got to start appreciating, that there is a cost of hygiene, there is a cost of healthcare, there is a cost of space for the waste and collection, etc., etc. And we've got to start evaluating the end-to-end costs over there, because it is possible to eliminate waste in the country, eliminate the entire pollution impacts of that if we use technology, and for that, innovation is critical. Making it affordable is step 2. If we are able to get the technology in place and then make it affordable, that is when we will have hit the jackpot.
That's right, Sunil. I mean, that's very well put. Let me now raise another issue before we, which is, of course, and which was something which was actually driving a group of nations, developing nations. It was really a divide between the global north and the global south at COP26, and which has been agitating minds, which is about climate finance. And the fact that the developed nations have not even till date been able to meet a commitment of $100 billion of climate finance a year. And I think of all the informed commentary that was coming out of the Prime Minister's commitment, one was that, of course, the $100 billion is actually a floor, obviously, and all the bold ambitions that India has taken in the intermediate and the long term will, of course, be contingent upon the availability of climate financing. And in another set of papers, I read articles that, the total cost of financing India's transition to net zero by 2070 will be in the range of about $10 trillion. And there is going to be, as of now, an unmet requirement of $3.5 trillion. Now, given that Nilesh is here, and this, as I said when I began, is a panel which is very, very high on finance, I'd like to know that how is it that we are able to finance this transition, and the role of, the overall policy framework in the financial sector, both within India and globally. So whether it is the multilateral development banks, whether it is the developmental financial institutions, whether it is the allocative efficiency of the capital markets, all these elements, how do they come together, Nilesh? How do you kind of put it in a cogent framework? And how do we make sure that as we move forward, we are able to fund this transition?
So if we look at India's savings right now, on a $3 trillion economy, at about 30%, we will be saving close to $1 trillion. So to generate $10 trillion of investments from here till 2070 is definitely within our means. However, we should be allowing market to finance this transition rather than going back to the allocation model. If we go back to Kyoto Protocol, under that protocol, companies which were producing refrigerated gases, which were depleting ozone layer, they were incentivized to move to CFC gases, and in order to do the transition, they were provided certain credits. One of the company in India, Gujarat Fluorochemicals, probably earned close to 1,000 crore by selling their carbon credit, and there was a very, very positive incentive for making that transition. So as India, we should leverage the fact that historically we haven't contributed to carbon creation as development. Even in present circumstances, with 17% population, we are creating or contributing to about 4% of emission. Hence, there should be a mechanism like carbon credit where countries which are contributing more compared to their per capita need should be compensating developing markets. The second thing which we should position is India in ESG space. We know global capital today is searching for eligible companies under ESG. Both China actually boycotted COP26, so it's quite likely that global capital from ESG point of view will be a bit circumspect about them. Brazil and South Africa, though they participated over there, they refused to make any commitment towards net zero. India has taken lead over there, and now it is up to Indian companies to attract global capital under the overall aegis of net zero by 2070. The final thing which is very, very critical is our own allocation of savings. While Indians are very good savers, they are not necessarily good investors. A lot of our savings goes into real estate, gold, kind of physical assets. How do we ensure that the sustainability financing becomes equally rewarding for investors? How do we bring them to domestic investors? What kind of tax incentive governments give to popularize them? That will all be extremely critical to ensure that domestic retail savings also flow towards financing of sustainability. Overall, my feeling is that today it's very difficult to envisage what kind of financing will be required for this transition. But if we allow market forces to operate, I'm sure they will be able to figure out an optimum methods of financing across debt, equity, mezzanine, and other structures.
Thank you, Nilesh. I mean, but just one question I had, because if you see the way, of course, if you look at renewables, particularly solar, the way the cost curve has changed over the last decade or so. And if you now look at some of the technologies which we are talking about and which will be very important in so far as the hard-to-abate sectors are concerned, whether it's steel or anyone else, this is technologies like green hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, etc. There are other nascent technologies which are still there. Now, capital has to come in, but then there's also this thing that, one, there is an emerging market risk when you are investing in emerging markets, including India. So when a financial manager is looking at it, there's an emerging market risk. And on top of that emerging market risk is superimposed the risk of technologies which are still not commercially proven, which are still very nascent. So how do you create the right policy framework and the right incentive structure to attract capital in the light of these elements?
So essentially, Siddharth, if we allow market forces to operate, they will be able to create innovative structures. Today, many concepts which are loss-making in nature, which does not seem to have path to profitability, are able to raise capital. They are able to raise capital based on concepts from high-risk investors. In India, essentially, we have very limited deciphering of risk. Either there is debt secured or there is equity. But between debt and equity, the kind of mezzanine structures which we have to create, they are fairly limited. If we open up our markets for innovations and improvements, I'm sure we will be able to raise necessary risk capital for setting up of technology, for commercialization of technology, and eventually once those technology stabilizes, we will be able to fund it with appropriate debt structure. The whole need for the sustainability financing will be creating layers of risk where one set of investors who are happy with lower return will get much higher safety, and one set of investors who are willing to take risk will have to also benefit from the higher return if the product takes off. The other important thing will be also democratization of risk. We have seen many large companies getting funded through IPO market where millions of investors came together to share the risk. Now, if people can come together to share commercial risk, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to come together to create a sustainable future. How do we allow market forces to operate? How do we deepen our capital market so that risk can be layered? How do we create appropriate incentivization through taxation, through ease of doing investment, so that local and global investors all come together for financing our needs?
Thank you, Nilesh. I think that's very well put. Rajiv, would you like to add to what Nilesh has said?
Yeah, thanks, Siddharth. Glasgow also saw a significant scale-up of private finance commitments from financial institutions who basically control or manage trillions of dollars. The large Black Rocks of the world have come together to commit. So in that sense, the amount of money that is coming into ESG funds is literally billions of dollars on a yearly basis. So to my mind, I'm already seeing various conversations from investors on seeing how they can. In fact, they are seeking out opportunities to be able to channelize money into ESG, and there are the likes of IFC Washington who are talking to us to see how they can provide us funding so that we in turn are able to fund ESG related projects and so on and so forth. Axis Bank itself has committed to double its green book over the next 5 years. I mean, not into 2020, 2070. Most of us won't be here, but we're taking 5-year targets. So in that sense, my own feeling is that availability of money is not a problem. What I'm actually a bit worried about is the narrative that coal is bad and everything other than coal is good. I think it is really a transition that we are playing out, and what we are actually looking for is transition finance. And so therefore, yes, in a country like India, even in 2070, 50% of our requirements will still be coal. And so therefore, to that extent, we've got to think of this as transition. We've got to push various polluting industries to be able to manage their pollution in a more effective manner. But to shut down financing to some of these dirty sectors, which is what is actually happening today, I think is a very, very dangerous proposition at this point in time, because it goes back to the point that you made, that in a country which is going to grow 7-8% over the next so many years, we will need power, and a certain part of that power will come from coal. And if you're going to shut down financing to that part, it's going to get difficult. For example, today, Siddharth, if anybody comes to us as a bank to set up a new thermal plant, he will not get money from us. It's as simple as that. So incrementally, everything is going into renewable and so on and so forth. And finally, to the point that you made about costs, let me just sort of put it out there that Axis Bank actually did India's first sustainable AT1 bond in the global markets. 40% of that was from ESG linked funds, and the pricing that we got was the tightest pricing that any bond got for that equivalent rating across the world. So I don't think that there is a emerging market overlay for good companies, good projects, and it's not just us. There are various entities who have been able to raise money very tightly for ESG-like projects in this country. So my own feeling is money is not a problem. I think if we get our regulations right, if we get our policies right, and we've got Indian entrepreneurship to back all that, I think getting money at a reasonable price, I don't think is a problem. But I only worry about the transition that we've got to play through, and we've got to play that a bit carefully.
So I think maybe just to add on to Rajiv's point there, this will be a transition. You can't switch on, as Rajiv mentioned, switch on and switch off. And that transition will take its time. The question is, how can we speeden up that transition? And what is it that we need to do to encourage that transition to happen much quicker? There are technologies in place, for example, that will use less coal and give a greater output. Now, can we, as we transition there, can we start incentivizing that plants, for example, start doing that? You can't switch off a plant, but you can force a plant to use less coal and produce greater output there. There are technologies out there that use the waste heat out of the plants, for example. So they become much more efficient over there. Can we incentivize and provide greater financing options for plants to go towards that as the next level? Because you can't switch on, and renewables, solar and wind is not going to answer everything immediately. There's a whole infrastructure around it that is going to need to have to come up before you can start getting solar and wind. Just to put that point in perspective, we put on our factory, covered every single roof of our factory with solar panels. At the end of it, it only covered 15% of our requirement. There was not enough room on the factory roof to absorb more panels. And those are realistic issues where you have companies, and of course industry uses the largest amount of electricity, and motors use the largest amount of that within industry. But effectively, we've got to find this transition and find this route to transition so that companies and organizations that really want to go there are actually helped in that transitionary process. It's just not practical to say rooftop solar is going to solve our problems. It's not. We need the entire environment around it. As you transition to renewables, your grids get unstable because of different times. You'll need to start strengthening grids there. So it's a whole ecosystem that needs to come together. But we've got to start taking very clear steps right now, which will include financing options, which will include incentivization from the government to help us move across that growth curve very, very quickly.
I think that's a point well taken, and as someone who's been in government myself for a long period of time, sorry, Partha, please go ahead.
Yeah, you finish what you're saying and then
So what I was saying is that the role of the government in framing policy and regulation, because especially, this is a discussion sometimes I have with my colleagues, MDs and CEOs of our operating companies. India being the kind of cost-conscious nation that we are, and the fact that if a company solely has to move forward on bearing the costs of the transition, it may well be pushed out of the market because the ultimate consumer cannot pay that kind of green premium that would be required for that particular product. And therefore, there is a need to create a level playing field. And that's where, the question of technology, policy regulation by government, so everybody moves. The thing is that either everyone moves or no one moves. And this is really true in the hard to abate sectors. So I just wanted to have a view of the panel on, government coming in and making the regulations. If you see the EU, again, there is a legislation. A lot of countries have legislation which mandates, reaching net zero by a certain date. And that then pushes you forward, and that levelizes the playing field. So I just thought I would just raise this issue to the panel and get your inputs on this. But Partha, before that, yes.
Yeah, maybe it's answer to both. I mean, I was kind of building on, and maybe it answers part of your question as well. So I'll connect it. So as Sunil was saying, and even Siddharth was saying, basically we need an incentive framework. So let's take about the solar. When it was 16 rupees, yeah, so still there was needed to be at some time that being supported by some incentive framework. And over a period of time now you see that the cost has evened out or even better than what even the traditional power can give. Now, therefore, a policy framework for adoption of this technology is a real thing. The next one is, let's take mobility, which is the other place where a huge amount of emissions happen. So if you're saying electric vehicles at some point need some bit of incentivization and subsidy in a sense, and also better interest rates so that it becomes an even field with the fossil fuel. So now what has happened is, from there we have come to a stage where three-wheelers are cost competitive with this. The four-wheelers have still not got exactly that, but three-wheelers have, and therefore now we can let them be on a market-driven force. But for some time, this kind of policy incentivization of sustainable outcome-based and low-carbon solutions, where they carry a premium by policy incentives, has to be a norm which we will have to build in. Just give you an example, continuing from the solar. Now there is, we have put solar, and if you have to put more solar, maybe we'll need 1.5 times of Singapore land mass to put the balance of the solar that we want to put, half of it. Now, if you have to move away from it, one of the things is floating solar, meaning put solar on water. And if you do that, it will have a little bit of different dimension. So a policy framework has to come to support that. Till again, that also comes on even keel. And then we have another option to kind of take the land mass, which is a premium now, and unburden it by saying water we already have, let's protect water as well as have floating solar. So I'm just giving a very specific example just to build on the point that we cannot walk away from there needing to have some policy framework, especially for low carbon and this premium. But we will have to kind of see that it comes to a stage and then it can start withdrawing, and then commercial forces can kind of take the center stage. But it is required till that time it is there. So which will immensely help a country like India.
Correct.
Siddharth, I would like to share the experience of pharma sector. When India got independence, we had product patents, and all the multinational companies were the large manufacturers, distributor of pharma products. In the 60s, we realized that this model cannot work, and we went for process patents. Indian entrepreneurs quickly reverse engineered and started producing those medicines on which they didn't have to pay royalty. This worked very well till the 90s, but then India had to become part of the global system, and product patent in medicine was one of the most important requirements. As we liberalized, we needed to be part of the global economy. We needed to accept the global standards on product patents. But the government and the industry worked together with global bodies to ensure that there was a 20-year transition period. India moved from process patents to product patents on medicine. And during the transition period, Indian entrepreneurs not only invested in creating basic research, but also kind of creating the scale on the generic side. Today, we are the generic pharmacy to the world. We have taken basic steps in new drugs, while we still have a long distance to cover. But compared to the 50s and 60s, we have covered a long distance. And today, the world is looking towards India as one of the solution provider, whether it is related to vaccines or related to generics. The government and Indian industry and entrepreneur came together to create pharmaceutical base, I think there is valuable lessons on creating this transition to sustainability.
No, I think you are absolutely right, Nilesh, because the rise of the generic pharma industry and the manner in which we kind of reverse engineered and the whole thing of process patents, that's one reason why pharma was so affordable and continues to be affordable to 1.3 billion Indians. Had we been on product patents initially, it would probably have been a very different scenario. So I think it's been one of the big success stories and a lot of lessons to be learned from that. Now, I have just time for some quick closing comments, which I'll bring in later by each of the panelists. But one very interesting question, which is flashing in front of the Q&A box, and I thought I would just raise it to you. And I'm raising it to the general panel, and please feel free to comment. So how, in your opinion, would Indian corporates be able to meet the sudden surge in the demand of experienced sustainability professionals or skill sets? So obviously there's explosion right now, and there's the fear of missing out, and everybody suddenly wants to be, as I say, on the sustainability bandwagon, double inverted commas. And so therefore the question is saying, how do you ensure that there's a supply of professionals there in that space? And in the absence of right people in the right job, do you think we would be carrying a short-term risk 2030 of not going in the right direction? So I would like to come in on this, but you are the panelists, so I leave it open to all of you to kind of.
Siddharth, I can only comment from the perspective, I'm not quite sure what a professional ESG specialist is supposed to look like. Right? Realistically speaking, the entire sustainability chain, ESG, extends across the entire contribution that every industry should give back to society. And decarbonization is one of them, and that is technology. And for that, there are enough technology companies out there that can be reached out to. But then there's the entire area of social equity and giving back to society. And of course, there's the entire part of governance and ensuring that ethics in government and the way you run business is maintained. So I don't think you really need professionals for that. Ethics in governance is not about a professional there. It's about a value system that a company develops internally. The social part is really clear. What is it that you need to do to give back to society around you? And I don't think you need professionals for that either. So I think we've got enough right people who've got their heart in the right place. And that's what you need. You need a passion for sustainability. You need a passion for doing what's right. And the rest of it will all come together.
That's very well put, Sunil. I think I completely agree with you. But for the rest of the panelists, your take, if any, on what the questioner has asked.
Siddharth, one could use that argument for the lack of experienced fund managers or IT professionals or corporate bankers or engineers, for that matter, in this country, isn't it?
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Our telecom sector is a great example, right? When we started, what telecom experts did we have? When the
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it will come, and Sunil has summarized it very well. All I'm saying is we just do need some specialist input of the path less traveled by others who have traveled that path. But those are global specialists which can always come in. And in today's economy, with the kind of global village that we are in, it's very easy, and it is important for companies to bring that kind of inputs in, of path traveled and what they've seen. But rest of it, we have it. I mean, like HR is for business by business, ESG is for business and by business. So, it's not a separate function by itself. There's some expertise required, which central HR can bring in and central ESG can bring in.
I think it is clear a PhD in sustainability is not going to necessarily solve the problem.
Sorry,
Nilesh.
Partha, sorry.
Sorry.
Good. I'm done.
So since Partha didn't mention the Sole dialogue, I am quoting on his behalf. अगर बुराई ने बंदूक चलाना सिखा दिया तो अच्छा ही हल चलाना भी सिखा देगी.
Absolutely. I think, Nilesh, that's very well said. And I just add my two penny bit to this, which is to Vasudev, who's the questioner, that I think, as Sunil correctly said, it requires vision, it requires common sense, it requires a sense of leadership and buy-in. And once that leadership buy-in, whether at the company level or at the national level is there, that vision is there, I think other things will start falling in place. There is no dearth of professionals in India on the technology side, and they will come in as the market expands. So it's not something which is a cause of concern for us. And we just now have about close to 4 minutes, and I would just like to leave it open to all four of you for your closing comments. So if there were two things that you had to suggest individually or as sectoral leaders to the government of India in transitioning to net zero by 2070, what would your two recommendations be? And starting with you, Sunil, and we will move clockwise on to all.
I would have preferred that Nilesh starts with that. He's more articulate in these things. But probably I would say the first one is define a clear roadmap. I think it is important to make visible what this roadmap is. We don't need a roadmap to 2070. We need a roadmap for the next 5 years, as Rajiv said, right? And then we need to deliver on that roadmap and then make a roadmap for the next 5 years. So that's the first thing. I think the second is we also then need to have a clear plan for implementation. And that involves incentives, that involves plans for financing, and that involves also technologies if required. So those are the two asks that I would put out there.
Thank you, Sunil. Rajiv, on to you.
I think as lenders, I'm actually quite comfortable in terms of the adoption of ESG practices among large corporate India. And we will continue to fine-tune our risk frameworks to be able to align to the larger goals of the country, but at the same time ensure that we have a clean book as well going forward. But I think the one thing that we certainly should be looking at is India has about 6.8 crore MSMEs, and I think getting those 6.8 crore MSMEs aligned to this larger goal, to my mind, is very, very critical. They have various issues. They are not of appropriate scale. Their profit margins are not appropriate to take on some of the costs that this could potentially bring on. But I think here is where the large corporate India and the government needs to come together to be able to align these 6.8 crore MSMEs to the larger goal that we are all aiming towards.
Thanks, Rajiv. That's very well put. Yes. Partha, and after that.
The one is corporates for change. Basically, all of us have to come together. Individually, we may be able to accomplish some, but together we can accomplish a large. For example, if you learn to think about design or about green material, then steel, cement, many industries will have to come together, and therefore both corporates enabling it and government enabling this, coming together and doing this will be an important factor. Second thing is the policy has to be in terms of the underserved, not unserved but underserved. It will include MSME, but it will also include the rural population, which the access to capital is not that easy, and the 3% and 4% interest still prevails. Yeah, so that is where our major thing has to come in terms of policy intervention till they can stand on their own 2 feet, and therefore I would request government to focus on that. So these two areas.
Nilesh, over to you for the last word.
So apart from what Sunil, Rajiv and Partha mentioned, I will just say public-private partnership. When in space research you could get Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, we created ISRO. when in atomic research you can get Dr. Homi Bhabha, and both of them were from private sector but came to public life, and that public-private partnership laid the foundation for India's space and atomic research. Same way, if public-private partnership comes together, the best of the brains from private and public sector will be able to create this transition.
Thank you all. We are spot on time, and you've been a wonderful panel. Thanks, Sunil, Rajiv, Partha, and Nilesh for being here with me today. And I hope to see you sometime in the future soon. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very well.
Very well moderated. Thank you very well.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, am I audible? Okay. Thank you all, our panel members and the moderator, for a wonderful session on making it net zero real. The subject for today's fireside chat is what is climate resilience and its importance in sustainability. To discuss this, I invite Ms. Abha Bakaya, senior news anchor for the fireside chat. Joining her is Ms. Mridula Ramesh, founder, Sundaram Climate Institute. Over to you, Ms. Abha.
Thank you so much, Nethi, and what a pleasure to be chatting with Mridula today. She has been a prolific writer and someone with immense knowledge of this topic, and one which the Prime Minister himself has now, recognized as a clear priority for the nation and globally. So, Mridula, we really wanted to understand when we're talking about resilience, climate resilience, what does it really mean and how is it important when it comes to sustainability? If we could connect the two, because very often we use these words loosely and people miss out on really the clear interpretation of it.
Yeah, thank you, Bombay Chamber, and thank you, Abha, for asking me that question. First, let me just make sure I'm audible and then go on from there. So I think we have to recognize how unprecedented some of the actions that the world as a whole has taken in the last few years, right? We've come together and said, we have this big problem and we have to work together, and here's the mechanism for getting to net zero, which is lowering our emissions, right? It's unprecedented, and I think we need a little bit of encouragement in that. But in doing so, we also need to recognize that the emission cuts so far are inadequate. Yes, they are unprecedented, and yes, we've moved the needle, but it's still inadequate. And that's because of the way the climate system works, right? There's something called climate inertia, which is once you put emissions in the air, they tend to stay up there for a long time, warming the planet. So even if we were to shut down all our coal plants, the warming will still continue. And that becomes important for India because India is arguably the most vulnerable nation to this warming climate. And we see this in the rising crescendo of floods and droughts that's hitting the country. Right? And that's really, resilience is, if you use the term, it's the ability of a system to bounce back after being hit. And when with the climate, you're just going to get hit all the time. And how can you make a sustainable business if you can't bounce back when the climate has changed and you're just going to get hit all the time? So, and why do I say, resilience is particularly important for businesses in contemplating the net zero path? Let's look at what being hit means in commercial terms. When people, the general population gets hit, they lose possessions, which means they have a less of a surplus to spend on other things. So demand comes down. When factories get flooded, shops get flooded, stock is lost. Again, profit comes down, especially when insurance says, we can no longer cover some of these risks, as is beginning to happen in some parts of the world. In dry regions, and when farmers start seeing crops being subjected, they're open to the elements and yields start falling, rural demand falls. And then there are entire sectors which are, rely on that rural demand. So if you don't build resilience and you're on the path to net zero, you're really missing part of the plot. Right? And this is the last, there are two other points I want to make on why resilience is so important. We are in a once in a lifetime moment, right? For many reasons, global supply chains are being resculpted. And we see that in textiles also. But which multinational will want to locate a factory which is in a place which is always in the news for being flooded or running out of water? Right? Nobody will want to locate. You may have the best labor, you may have, cost to market, you may be really good, you may have the whole ecosystem in place. But if you're in a place that's always in the news for being flooded, it's unlikely that a global major will want to locate a supply chain node there. And the last point I want to end with this question is, net zero and the need to lower our carbon emissions has been firmly anchored world over. It's anchored, it's in the conversations, and there is an action plan to get us there. Good or bad, inadequate or not, we are on the path. Resilience needs its fair share of the conversation, which it's not. And water, is a key part of resilience. And that's why the second book was written, because Watershed was really written to say that water needs to be part of the conversation, because if you're not resilient, you're not sustainable. In a very financial sense, you're not going to sustain.
Okay. So how are corporates interpreting some of this? Give us some examples, Mridula. Share with us really, what you feel corporates are doing, in the field to really take some of this forward.
Here, I've seen startups move a little quicker than corporates. So let me step back and say what corporates are doing. Again, let me break up resilience into two bits, right? So what happens when you get flooded and what happens in a dry place. And I'm going to try and see if I can share a slide, but if I can't, I'll just explain it. So why do so many of our cities flood? Like why Chennai, where I'm right now, is just in the news fairly often for being, flooding. So why does that happen? One of the reasons, and I'm not saying it's the only reason, but one of the reasons it floods is because we don't do a very good job of managing our solid waste. And people might be asking, what does that have to do with flooding? Well, if you don't manage your solid waste, it goes and blocks the drains and the waterways, and there's nowhere for the water to flow out. And you get flooding as a result. And what we need to understand is many of these resilience building measures also help you on the path to net zero in ways that people don't often think about. Waste, and not just solid waste, but waste in a more generic sense contributes, I think, by one estimate, about 4% of India's greenhouse gas emissions. So if you manage your waste, you get towards your net zero, but you're also making your cities more resilient. So let me take my own industry, which is the textile industry, and say, how did we do it? We weigh literally every gram within our factories, and we segregate it and we sell it. Otherwise, we won't make money. And it's not just my factory, it's factories across the textile industry that do it. And because so many of us do it, entirely new business models begin to develop, right? And that's the big thing. As more and more people go circular, which is a very popular word nowadays, that is, circular just means beginning to reuse your waste into different streams and reimagining waste as a resource. You get new business models evolve. But now flip the coin and see what happens in a dry region, right? Especially valid for peninsular India, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, all dry states. And one thing that businesses listening to this need to understand is, whenever a town or a region runs out of water, for the policymaker, it's a no-brainer to shut down the industry first. They will never cut off domestic supply. They will never cut off the farmers' access to irrigation first. Industry will be the first, to fall. And you see that in our thermal power plants. There's a study by the World Resources Institute, which I've cited in my book, that says, thermal power plants in dry regions have a 21% lower, plant utilization factor. At 21% lower plant utilization factor, you're not making money, right? And if you really want to, become resilient, reuse your water, as so many people are doing. Sewage is I've called it the Brahmastra in our back pocket in my book, and that is like wastewater markets are developing across cities in India. And the good news is they're bringing jobs, and they're unleashing animal spirits. But the best way to become resilient in a dry place, and I'm going to try and see if I can do the slide here. The best way to become resilient in a dry place is to not use water at all. And that is, here I'm just, this is a slide from the book. And if you look, this is the volume of water used while generating electricity. Renewables don't use any water, use next to no water while producing power, which is a great option in dry regions. So this, just going circular or doing it differently entirely is important in building resilience. One last point, which the earlier panel flagged, which is, how do you get SMEs to do it? Because big companies have the wherewithal to employ talent to get this underway. But what do small companies do? And here I really want to give a shout out to all the industry associations, organizations like the Bombay Chamber. I was just looking through the programs that they offer. It's fantastic. And, industry organizations play a very critical role in handholding people. And that's why the need to build resilience needs to sort of take equal share with net zero, because you need both to be sustainable. And a good way to get them SMEs along the path is to work through industry organizations like the Bombay Chamber.
Okay. So, Mridula, what about corporates that interface with rural India? How are they what are some of the challenges that they're facing, and how are they really going about implementing this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Abha, because Indian agriculture is it's a little bit of a frightening story, and that's because so much of our crop is rain fed, and a large proportion. If you're saying SMEs need hand-holding, the small and marginal farmer really needs a lot of hand-holding, right? And if you look at resilience, there yields are going to fall, and that's an entirely different discussion. But what is a sort of more easily addressable opportunity is, think of the fact that estimates vary, but we lose between a fifth to a third of our crops to just waste after harvest, right? And one of the reasons we lose that is because we don't have enough storage to keep them safe. And some of the storage that we have is not at the farm gate, but a small farmer can access it. And worse still, it's not managed. So if you just have like a godown which is open and rats can come and eat it, you might as well store it out in your field, right? It doesn't make any difference. So I'm seeing startup, the good news, and I'm coming to the good news now. The good news is I'm seeing startup action explode here, right? So one of the startups that I've written about in my book takes these warehouses on hire, right, and manages it. So gets, I think the grain rice loss came down from 20% to like 5% or 2%, which was amazing. And they sort of give the farmer a printed receipt saying, this is now collateral, and they've tied up with financial institutions to say you can now borrow against this. So it's a winner along multiple dimensions, because farmers now have actual collateral, which is a problem with small and medium farmers to lend against. And they're bringing losses down. Actually, until recently, the startup action in this space was really exploding, because there's another startup that uses what you'll consider agricultural waste to generate energy, and then to provide cooled storage spaces, so the rotting goes down even further. So I think this is an exciting space. And the good news is each of these managed warehouses brings 8 jobs with it. So if you manage all the unmanaged warehouses and you add the additional small warehouses, you're talking 350,000 jobs, conservatively speaking. Those are new jobs.
Wow.
In rural India.
Right. No, it's fascinating, because you've clearly done so much, in-depth research on this, Mridula, and it gives us an insight into some of the major shifts taking place in our country. And, that's perhaps what I wanted to touch upon, just a little bit more in terms of India and the unique challenges perhaps that it faces as a country, the vulnerabilities. We seem to be now looking at this, whether it's from a regulatory standpoint or whether it's from the startup action, but clearly everyone's starting to get involved in the conversation. But just really how you feel India is placed, in terms of where it's at in its trajectory.
Okay, so let me just again resort to a slide, because this is something that we need to, this is just the decadal damages from floods, landslides, and storms, right? So in the early part of the 20th century, there was essentially nothing. And now you see this, right? And even if you stop all emissions, this is not going to reverse because of climate inertia.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's why resilience becomes important. And it's not, we're talking net zero, and I'll tell you why it's important to embed it into the conversation. I think the earlier panel also spoke of the need for compensation, right? You need money. If you want to make a change, you need money. And a lot of organizations that I talk to say, look, if we lower our carbon, we're getting money for it, whether you're a not-for-profit or a for-profit. But if you're managing water and waste, not so much. And that's like a false compromise. As I said, many of these have overlapping benefits, but there is also a need for giving adequate finance for resilience building. The second point is the role of large companies, especially large buyers, in building resilience within SMEs. Again, you need to pay for it. Definitely going for renewables and solar power, etc. I'm seeing models where the funding goes through the larger buyer to bring down emissions in the supply chain, and that's positive. But when you look at water management, especially, we're all wearing dyed clothes. We're not wearing undyed clothes. To manage the environmental impact of this, and if you manage it, you do get your emissions down also in some part. You need to pay for it, which is another thing that needs to get embedded in the conversation and not entirely understood. So to answer to your question, where is India? India is in a worrisome place. We're in a good place as far as getting our emissions down. We are. We've got it. We've got our heads around it. We've got a plan. And I think, yes, we're in the stage of saying, okay, we need a 5-year plan. We need a 10-year plan. And this is the trajectory. This is the incentive. This is all of that. In resilience building, I think we're in a more worrisome place.
Okay. How can, Nilesh is asking, Nilesh Bhaskar Sathe is asking, how can farm stubs burnt in Punjab be recycled to stop emission?
Okay, so there are several action items on the farm stubble. There is, I think NTPC has said you can make it into pellets and we'll burn it in our thermal plants. That's one option. There is another startup called Sampoorn Earth, which makes biogas out of stubble. I saw another startup doing, plywood essentially with low emissions, so you can do that. People making cutlery, crockery, you name it, it's there. The problem is the window is so short. It's the logistics challenge that needs to be managed. The cost of collection in the time frame that is there. And that's why even though these options exist, it ends up often being burnt.
Okay. And is there any website in India, Suhas Shetty is asking, to guide industries on sustainability or any other, I guess, reference points?
There are many websites and they vary. I would just say, go to your industry association because they would have done the homework on how to get on the path of sustainability. But I'm just saying that sustainability is carbon and the other things to build resilience. That's the only thing. Because, if you're net zero but your factory gets flooded and you don't have any production, that's not very sustainable.
Right. Okay. Anything you'd like to leave us with, Mridula, in terms of, perhaps things that we can do individually as well? Any message that you'd like to share? As you said, some of the startups are doing such amazing work. And there's, go ahead.
So I think, again, this seems such an intractable problem because you asked me where is India and we are in a worrisome place. But I think the hope I see is that Rome wasn't built in a day. And here our population is actually our friend. And I'll tell you what I mean. In my first book, I spoke of Israel. In my second book, I've spoken about Singapore. Right? Each of these, Mumbai is 4 Israels and 4 Singapores. Right? A single small city, Singapore, by investing a reasonable amount, has created billions of dollars, many tens of industries, companies, and several hundred jobs in just building water resilience. And there is smart policy because look, we live in an economic world. This audience doesn't need that thing. So in an economic world, what is priced is priced, and what is unpriced becomes invisible. So let's use it as a strength. You don't need a policy at an India-wide level. Let's build resilience building policy at a city level. Like Bangalore has led the way, saying solid waste managers have to manage, bulk solid waste managers have to manage their own solid waste, and that has spawned a wave of innovation in startups. They said you have to become ZLD if you're a big switch disposal, switch generator, and that has spawned again. I think 2,000 plus sewage treatment plants. So I'm saying let's play to our strengths, and you don't need to tackle this at the India-wide problem. You can tackle this at a city-wide problem, which is a far more chewable problem, and that kind of policy can really shift the needle.
Lovely. Mridula, with that, I think we can wrap up the session. And thanks for answering some of those questions as well. It was wonderful to hear from you and really get an insight into some of the big shifts that are taking place, and also a true understanding of resilience as well as sustainability and the relevance between the two. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Abba.
Can I start? Okay, thank you very much for this excellent discussion, Abba and Mridula, especially the emphasis on resilience building and the various challenges we as a society need to ponder upon. With this, we now move to a very interesting panel discussion, that is technology can drive sustainability. We have been listening to several conversations in the last 2 days, and what we have seen is that while we have great ambition and the will, the transformation or rather transition, as the earlier discussion was talking about, cannot happen overnight. The ambitions can be met not just by having knowledge about technologies, but also on the availability and accessibility of these technologies to the relevant stakeholders. Mr. Kant also in his keynote highlighted the importance, and he also spoke about few technologies and how India is poised to adopt and integrate them. I think hence it is of pertinence that the closing panel also discuss or dwell on these various elements on how technology can drive sustainability. And it is my honor to also invite our eminent industry leaders here for this discussion. Let me first invite the moderator for this panel discussion, Mr. Sambitosh Mohapatra. He is the ESG platform leader India for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you. I would also want to invite welcome. I would also want to invite our panel members, Ms. Suman Mishra, CEO, Mahindra Electric Mobility Limited. Welcome, Suman. I would also like to invite Mr. Bill Shukla, Executive Vice President and Group Business Head for Environment Business Unit, Thermax Limited. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, thank you, Anis. Thanks for the introduction.
Thank you. Let me also invite Mr. Anindya Chaudhary, Country Manager, Shell, India. Welcome, Anindya.
Thank you very much.
Let me also invite Mr. Rahul Sankhe, President and Co-founder of Sensok. Welcome, Rahul.
Thank you, Anindya.
And let me also finally invite Mr. Sandeep Bangia, Head of EV Tata Powers. Sandeep. Okay, well, thank you once again and welcome to all the panelists here, and over to you, Mr. Mohapatra.
Thank you, Anish, for the introduction of the panelists. Let me first of all welcome all our audience to the panel discussion. We'll also welcome Anindya, Bill, Rahul, Suman, and Sandeep. Hopefully Sandeep is joining. Anish, is he in the backstage? Okay, I don't think Anish is there. Okay, but going forward, quite a panel we have managed to congregate on a Saturday evening across the energy and transportation value chain, to be candid. Oil and gas, power and network businesses, OEMs providing technology, and an IT service provider integrating it all. So I am looking forward to a learning experience here. Hopefully you will take some things out of this panel discussion going forward. We also have legacy companies, right? The traditional Tata Power, Mahindra, Shell, along with which you also have Sensok, one of our startups. And in between all of them, Thermax, one of the sustainability providers of many of these technologies. Just also to belabor the point, Shell has declared to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050. Tata Power will be net zero carbon by 2050. Only last week I heard Mr. Sinha saying that he will advance it to 2045. Mahindra is a carbon neutral by 2040. And Thermax had promised in 2019 that they will reduce their carbon emission by 25% by 2024 in 5 years, right? So therefore, these are all responsible, sustainable companies managing the transition as we speak. So welcome you all. The structure of this discussion over the next 50 minutes would be a short introduction by me over the next 3-4 minutes. After that, we dwell directly into the panel discussions where we'll hear the views of panel members over the questions that will be posed to them by me. Post that, we will open it up for audience question and answers for next 5 minutes. And then we can conclude the session. So that's the structure of our session that we are planning to do. And the context is quite right in the sense, only last month India declared its net zero commitment by 2070 and reduction by the carbon intensity by 2030. We have a big plan for a renewable scale up. It was, I remember 5 years back, we were involved in that 100 gigawatt and people used to imagine whether India can reach 100 gigawatt. Then we went to 175 and now we hear it is 500 gigawatt by 2030. All because the technology and the cost of that technology was quite affordable. Because significant amount of that cost gets passed on to consumers, and being a low income country, which is we're only becoming a middle income country in the next 3 to 4 years, there's a huge pressure on cost and the affordability at that. So therefore, now that renewable is affordable, I think we are seeing the scale up quite possible there. The second, I think the question is whether technology can drive sustainability. I don't think that's anymore a question. Technology will drive sustainability for sure, but how do we manage this transition? How do we finance this transition? How do we have people who can manage this transition? That becomes quite an important question as we go forward. So in the discussion, the questions would be around 4 broad elements. Right? First is how technology development would support some of our sectors in the net zero. That's one. And just to at a overall level, we are talking about 50 billion tons of carbon emission every year. Now, if I use Bill Gates' way of segregating this carbon emission, 31% comes by making things like steel, cement, and aluminum. 27% of it comes from producing things, which is 19% comes from transportation, moving things, right? And 16% from growing things, be it our agriculture, meat industry, and 7% from heating and cooling. Now we have, over the last at least 5-6 years, we've heard about technologies, right from managing the energy efficiency or the whole shift from molecules to electrons, right? Which means that a lot of studies which say that can we move from an oil and gas intensive economies to an electronic economy. That's one. Second, we're talking about energy mix transition, be it some of the latest technologies of storage, hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, end use sector electrification and bioenergy, right? So therefore, some of those technologies and whether they are cost competitive now is something we'll hear from our panelists. The second element is also, while a lot of talk is happening around the environment, water, plastic waste, we also believe technology can play a big role in upping corporate governance by enabling better data management and traceability. And also on the social agenda by providing skills, financial and health inclusion to communities, employees, right? So therefore, that's the second element we want to bring it to life. The third element is about matured and emerging technology solutions. With so much of uncertainty, which technology to bet on and how do we finance that? That would be the third element of discussion. And then what is the kind of support that we would require from the ecosystem, policy makers, regulators, financial markets? So that's the fourth element that we'll speak to. So with that, let me dive into the questions. The first question would go to Anindya. Anindya, Shell has been a traditional energy company. And I hear from your designation that you are energy transitions guy out there in Shell. So what's happening there? And you have declared a goal for net zero by 2050. What kind of technologies are you betting on? How are you going about this transition in India?
And thanks, Sam, for the question, and also inviting Shell to this panel. Greetings to you and every other eminent panelists on stage, and also the participating audience. You're right. Shell is a traditional company. We have been an oil and gas company for over 100 years, and we have been largely we take great pride in being a technology-led company, and we have several industry firsts to our credit. And we expect to leverage this technological prowess to navigate the challenges of the energy transition. So let me just break down for you what we are targeting to do in the next several years, and also to sort of state here that we have been increasing our ambition in step with what society wants us to do, as is coming out from the IPCC report and sort of global targets that are being set for net zero by 2050. So in October 2021, we set a target to reduce absolute emissions by 50% by 2030 compared to our 2016 levels on a net basis. Now, this covers all emissions in Scope 1, which will come directly from our operations, and in Scope 2, from the energy we buy to run our operations that are under our operational control. This complements our targets to reduce the carbon intensity, which we call the net carbon footprint, of the energy products we sell as well, which is sort of step 3, Scope 3, in step with society. This includes short-term targets. I will not get into those details at this point in time. Just to sort of embed this culture of decarbonization, and I sort of liken it to what we have seen in the past several years, how safety was sort of driven into the hearts and minds of the company and every employee. I'm seeing the same thing happening with energy transition right now. We have linked the pay of more than 16,500 staff to the target to reduce carbon intensity of our energy products by 6 to 8% by 2023 as compared to 2016. We believe that our annual oil production has peaked in 2019, and we expect our total oil production to decline by 1 to 2% a year until 2030. We are investing around $1 billion every year in low carbon energy, such as charging for electrical vehicles, hydrogen, biofuels, and electricity generated by wind and solar power. We plan on increasing that to around $2 billion, provided we can find the right commercial opportunities. We seek to have access to an additional 25 million tons of carbon capture and storage CCS capacity by 2035, equal to 25 CCS facilities that the size of the Quest project that we have in Canada. You mentioned the point about carbon removals, and I think this is something that we think is going to be a key technology that will be required in the coming years, because not all emissions can be avoided. By 2025, we will end a routine flaring of gas, which generates carbon emissions from the upstream assets that we operate. By 2025, we expect to have kept the methane emissions intensity of Shell-operated assets to below 0.2%. Now, as you can see that for doing so many of these things, a lot of technology solutions will have to be developed or even invented. And we believe that this will benefit not only our company and our industry, but we can extend this to other industries as well. But we can talk more about that later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anindya, for your comments on that. So let me then welcome Sandeep. I think we missed you in the first part. So you come in, and that question is directly to you now. You are another sector which is bearing the brunt of transition pressures, right? Be it around your power purchase, be it around modernization of your network, and be it managing the consumer demand. I would say 3 big aspects where you are facing the transition pressure. Because in India, the existing regulatory and contractual frameworks makes, I think, did we again lose Sandeep? I think so. Yeah. So I think by the time Sandeep joins, Suman, I will have to come to you. So yes, we have heard the efforts of Shell in actually making that transition from a oil and gas major and the reduction path that they have undertaken. So what about, so Mahindra in 2018 actually took on these goals of net zero by 2040, right? So how are you transitioning your businesses and investments, be it from your ICE engines to EV? Keen to understand how you are managing the policy landscape, which is continuously evolving around that, and the businesses and the bet that you're making on certain technologies going forward. Given that you already have existing investments which may be only recent in nature. So, Suman, over to you. So, Sandeep, can you hear us? Because after Suman, I'll go back to you.
Yeah. I can hear you. I've been struggling with my connectivity here. But yeah, I think I've got it in order now. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries. So, Suman, you can go next. I think after that, Sandeep can come in, please.
Sure. Thanks, Samitosh. So Mahindra, as you know, it has been always pioneering how to make its businesses climate friendly. We have a very high focus on energy efficiency. So just to give you an example, a vehicle today is made with almost 65% less energy than it was 8 years ago, just in the consumption, the regular ICE. Then we make engines at Chakan, and that itself has doubled energy productivity in 4 years. We had said it would take 25 years. We are adopting renewable energy at scale. We are already moving to, towards a zero waste to landfill organization. We are making locations water secure. There are 2 factories that don't take water for 200 days in a year from the municipality. And beyond that, and that's where sort of our businesses come in, is we have businesses such as electric vehicles, shared mobility, green buildings, solar energy, waste to energy, auto recycling, micro irrigation, all of these, which are climate friendly businesses for the future. So at a group level, Mahindra Group is indeed defined ESG as one of its big priorities and working towards delivering its commitments. But let me talk a little bit about the topic for which I am here, which is the electric mobility. The first thing I want to say is EV as a technology, electric vehicles as a technology solution, it really offers significant emission benefits if you compare it with a traditional ICE vehicle. Normally we say, oh, you're replacing the tailpipe with the with the fossil fuel generated electricity, so it's not actually benefiting, but almost all the analysis of the reports that have been developed to date show that if you take a medium-sized battery electric vehicle in India, life cycle emissions are lower by almost 20 to 30%. And we expect that as the electricity mix in the future changes away from coal, that will reach almost 60% lower emissions. Also, the other part which we say, okay, if you have EV, it is going to cause large increases in power demand. Some analysis has been done which shows maybe it will be only 1% higher power demand, not as much as we are thinking. So the overall basis, I think EV as a technology is offering significant emission benefits. But now when you talk about the technology and the investments associated with the EV technology, as some of you might know, lithium-ion batteries are the predominant technology used today. And we expect it to at least be the dominant technology for at least 3 to 5 years. There are a few kinds of this lithium-ion technology. There's LFP, there's NMC, there's NCA. And how we determine where we'll invest is, really fit for application. All my vehicles, which is a 3-wheeler in the last mile mobilities, are using LFPs, for example, because that is where the commercial or the total cost of ownership value proposition works out. So you have to look at the application and then choose the technology. But we do know that a lot of research is going on to improve the energy density, and which will therefore reduce the raw material consumption and overall also reduce cost. The big disruption we are looking for forward to is the solid state batteries. Maybe it will be coming closer to 2030. We don't know yet, but that will be a huge disruption. Fuel cells and green hydrogen, that is again another topic that is hugely in discussions, because that's the application that can be used for the large distance transportation like your trains or your bigger commercial vehicles. So that is yet again, work is going on. Companies are developing the technology, but it's going to take a little bit of time. In India, what is happening in terms of adoption, if you see the other side of the picture, there are 2 categories which have reached a total cost of ownership value prop, which is the 2-wheelers and the 3-wheelers. And that is why you always see 2-wheeler EV and 3-wheeler EV in the news almost every other day. We are expecting that at least in the category that I have products in, which is electric 3-wheelers, today it's around 7 to 10% penetration, and it should reach about 30% in 2025. And 4-wheeler inflection may be a little bit further away. So the other thing I would say is, the there is going to be significant reduction in the battery technology. And when that happens, this will drive further uptick. It's a both side. It's not just a supply side or an investment side. The customer actually must buy the product as well. So as we are seeing the cost curve of the cells coming down, we should expect that there will be significant adoption, maybe 5 to 6 years from now, in the larger vehicle categories. In the smaller ones, the TCO is already here. So I guess there is certain uncertainty, but when we are in the particular industry, you can evaluate the technology and make your adjusted bets. As I said, four-wheelers are at a very nascent state of adoption, and at least I can tell you, for the next 10 years, we are going to see both diesel and EV vehicles coexisting. So the investments are being made accordingly, really.
So thanks, Kumar. So we'll come back to Sandeep. So now that the vehicles are ready, is your network ready, Sandeep? So there I had a question to you. I think Tata Power is also facing a lot of transition pressure, right? On all the three fronts, be it on sourcing of your power, upgrading of your network, or your consumers becoming prosumers now, right? Because most of them would also be producing energy. And we have the regulated sector, which means that any investment that you do has to be passed on to consumers, and there is an affordability given the state of our country, demographics, GDP and all. So how do you manage the transition pressure, along with which, for example, you are creating new value pools, like when you are putting up a charging infrastructure or a home automation kind of a thing. So how are you looking at this transition? And I was also sharing with the panel and audience how Mr. Sinha, Tata Power had announced a 2050 net zero goal. I think he has advanced it by 5 years to 2045, right? So therefore, any views around that? Sandeep, over to you.
Yeah, hi, first of all, thank you for getting me on this distinguished panel amongst all the wonderful people here. Well, I think I will not have a view on what my CEO has said. I just have to do it. Okay, so that's very clear. And he is well within his rights to increase the target even further. But having said that, I think the kind of things that we as a company are doing, we as a verticals are doing, give him the confidence that this is doable, very much doable, and this is the change that is being driven right from the top, obviously. So the proportion of power generated from renewable, clean and thermal sources is shifting very, very fast, as you can see. In India, in Tata Power, very strongly. And Tata Power is not the same company that it used to be 105 years back when it started. In the last maybe a decade or so, there is a lot more than what generation, transmission, distribution that we do as a company. For example, we are into renewable, big time, the largest renewable contracting, microgrids, then battery storage solutions, solar pumps, the solar rooftops, electric vehicle charging, and we are by far the leader by a mile in all of those, all of these new streams. So we are actually now having a customer touch point of more than just switch on and switch off of power. The customer buys a electric vehicle, we are touching him through the electric charging point. He buys a home automation solution, we are touching him through the home automation solution. So the touch points to a discom like ours have increased significantly, and that's, I think, giving us an additional responsibility as to how do we make the entire downstream from the generation energy management, which is an ESCO vertical. We get into the customer's premises and with the promise that we will reduce your power consumption by so and so. Now this actually comes in the face of this entire business proposition. Why would somebody who wants to sell electrons go as a separate unit and say that, look, I want to reduce the consumption? But I think this is where the sustainability and responsibility angle of the organization is. Now, coming to the electric mobility part of the story, I think we have taken a head start on the electric mobility front here. We are currently at about 1,250 odd public charging stations. This does not include the home chargers that we've installed for about 7,000-8,000 households when they have bought the cars. These public chargers are across destination chargers at offices, malls, shopping complex, cinemas, and right up to the highways, in which our partnerships with the oil companies is really, really helpful. So that's the kind of things that we are driving. The plan is to go to about 2025. We want to go to about 10,000 stations, which also is likely to be significantly enhanced. We want to actually tackle the problem of chicken versus the egg. So when Sumanji's company makes vehicles, we'll be very happy to charge them. We are waiting for them to charge, so the chicken and egg problem we're trying to solve ahead of time, and this is exactly what we believe. There was an interesting study which suggested that the moment a customer sees a charger, he gets the confidence to say, oh, there is a charger, now I can go and buy a vehicle. He may not necessarily use that charger at all, because 90% of the times he'll be using his home charger. But it's just a very psychological thing, and we are trying to sort of break that into a very logical thing. The business case is a long distance away, but I think when the business case arrives, we are right there to ring in it all. Yeah.
Sure. Now, Bill, I'll come to you. Many of them are talking about their own journeys, and you have been providing solutions to it, right? So, and across the value segments that I think Suman touched and India touched. But how difficult is it to convince someone to procure these kind of technologies? Because as we also have reached out to our own clients, there's a lot of hesitation, because some of these technologies, though they come with what they call as a green premium, they look at it as a cost rather than looking at a lifespan of benefits or value creation kind of a lens, right? So therefore, what has been your journey? What are the technologies that you have? First, like if you can just articulate some of that, which is supporting these transitions. And second, how have been the consumer? Is there still an hesitation because only the best of ESG compliant companies seem to be taking solution from you, or is there a more socialized adoption of these kind of technologies? So over to you, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, all right, thanks for inviting me here, and good evening and hello to all the fellow panelists, and good evening to all the audience out there. So first of all, let me say that any company which has an ambition to achieve net zero, and if it's in any kind of business, it will be consuming heating, cooling, and water in the process of making or doing something, and then it will be creating some sort of waste. So Thermax is very uniquely positioned as providing the input utilities of heating, cooling, water, chemicals, steam, and then also handling the waste, which is wastewater and the waste heat that gets produced. So long before climate change became the topic of discussion almost 15 years back, the mission of the organization was to deliver sustainable solutions in the field of energy and environment. And we have been tracking our balance sheet as green and non-green. That is the amount of business that we do towards black business or generating using coal-based boilers or non-fossil based energy generation. So that's a little bit about what we do. In terms of technologies that we have currently, let me begin with that, because there's a whole lot of technologies that's very exciting and in the future. At the moment, what we are offering to all our customers who have already embarked on the journey to net zero is a direct reduction in their CO2 emissions by offering green energy in the form of biomass-based plants, in the form of solar energy. That's direct. But there's a whole lot of other activities that we are able to assist our customers with in terms of indirect energy savings, which also help them become greener and help them reduce their carbon footprint. To give you a couple of examples, let's say any cement plant produces clinker, and there is a lot of waste heat that is generated in a cement plant. Thermax delivers waste heat recovery boilers that can use this waste heat which has been in the past been just left out in the air, we take that input as a heat and generate electricity that suffices 30% of a cement plant. And as you know, electric consumption or the consumption of electricity is about 40% for a kg of clinker that is produced. So every cement plant, when it installs a waste heat recovery boiler supplied by Thermax, they reduce their electricity consumption by 30%, which in other times they would have procured from the grid, which is largely still fossil based. So this is one way that a cement plant can say that I'm going green. The other exciting technology around that is coming up is electric boilers itself. So today I can stitch together a solution where I can say that I can put up a 3 to 5 megawatt biomass based boiler, which is completely green. I can manage the supply chain of the biomass. The electricity generated from that, I can either give it directly or I can even feed it to an electric boiler that can be used to generate hot water. So now I'm closing a complete loop. The other way we are helping customers is by reducing their water footprint. So almost all companies, as part of their net zero commitments, while we are talking about CO2 emissions, there is also a very major criteria there about becoming net water zero also. And Suman briefly touched about that two of their plants, consume nil or zero water for most part of the year. And the way that to do that is to recycle water. Again, when you recycle water, there is an energy consumption that goes into it. And today, with the basis of a solar power plant or a biomass-based power plant, I can help companies recycle water using green-based energy. So we are more and more closing the circular loop, as we are calling it. So that's a little bit about that, but there's a whole lot of exciting technologies around carbon capture, hydrogen, etc. that we can talk in the next phase of the discussion. So back to you, and thanks for the question.
Thanks, Bill, for this. So Rahul, coming back to you, I think most of the conversation till now has been around operational technologies and also focused around the environment part of it, right? So you are the one who stitches it all through, who integrates all this so that the management sees the dashboard where he can take certain decisions, be it on capital allocation, be it on how his sustainability measures are working on the ground. So over to you as how you look at the solutions, not only from the environment side, but how can you also facilitate empowering the communities, employees, or improving governance? I would want also those elements to be brought out. Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. A very good evening to all the panelists and the audience. We are, Sensoc is basically an early stage company, so we are very small compared to all the other organizations represented here on this panel. What we do essentially is, we built a cloud-based software platform for what we call asset lifecycle management. It's focused on solar, but can be extended to other other asset classes like interconnection, transmission lines, and so on. The idea is basically to enable creation of what we call a single source of truth for all asset data. When we look at, let's say, a solar PV power plant, and then help build effectively a digital twin of the solar asset. And what that allows you to do is essentially help optimize the performance of the power plant, extend and maximize the life cycle of that asset. So you get the most, I would say, impact from a clean energy or emissions reduction perspective for every dollar that you invest in the asset. So the key here is, ability to integrate data from multiple sources, right? So whether it's of course, the SCADA system that's tracking, monitoring generation from the power plants, or new emerging sensing platforms that you have, for example, drones, or any other sensor, right? Tomorrow you might have a robotic rover going around the plant, maybe doing some measurements or characterizing a few things, doing some investigation. You should be able to write an application and plug it into a central platform where it's just feeding everything in and capturing that data in a structured way so that it helps build the digital twin, right? So that's what we are creating at Sensoc. And this is crucial in our opinion. I mean, it's not core product technology, so If you look at what solar PV or battery technologies, etc., are talking about, that is the first step at the technology level, creating these solutions, and then you need software essentially to be able to stitch this together and manage this entire ecosystem efficiently, right? Both at an individual unit level or the asset level, as well as between assets, basically talking and optimizing the interaction between these assets. So that's what we are focusing on essentially. And once you have data, which is key, and that's sitting on the cloud, you can then start mining that, analyzing that, using ML algorithms and generating insights that they can use for day-to-day decision making that can be automated, in the sense that if you are advanced enough, you could have grid components that are talking to each other and making some decisions in terms of how power should go to whom, and that's where you have these concepts of virtual power plants and so on that are emerging now, where you have a network of distributed energy assets that the VPP effectively it's a cloud-based distributed software essentially that's optimizing and managing the contribution of those set of assets or resources to the overall grid. So it's at one level you have that, and then of course you have the asset level software like what we are building that helps you manage your asset better and manage the interaction of that asset with other systems. So we believe that's obviously there's a lot of software out there, and there are many startups like ours working on different pieces of this puzzle, and this is what will come together. Essentially, the analogy can be given to what the transition of in the computer world, right, and in the industry, where you had mainframes and largely centralized computing to distributed computing on the internet, and you had this complete glue layer of the internet, right, that was developed to manage this. I think that's pretty much what is happening with the energy infrastructure, where it's becoming more and more distributed, and not just generation but also consumption points are increasing. I mean, of course, you have adding other consumption units like electric charging systems, and those cars also can potentially be contribute back, right? If they have excess energy, they're plugged in, you could even imagine them contributing back to the grid. So you need software to manage all of this, and that's where I think technology will play a crucial role in enabling and supporting this transition.
Sure. And Rahul, it's quite contextual because many discussions in the new paradigm of ESG is all about capturing data, and these are all non-financial data, right? And top 1,000 companies by market cap anyway have to report it voluntarily this year, mandatorily next year onwards. There has to be trust ecosystem built around it. Today, a lot of acquisitions come on greenwashing and putting out something which cannot be verified or measured. So some of these platforms do play a role in at least ensuring the trust equation between the stakeholders go up, and then the management is also doing the right things in front of all the stakeholders. So thanks Rahul for this. So Anindya, I'll come back to you. You talked about what Shell was doing for itself, right? So we have also heard about Shell investing in R&D technologies to ensure that transitions of some of the hard to abate sectors, be it cement, steel, aluminium, is supported. So some time back, we've also heard of entities like IKEA supporting their tier 1 suppliers with clean investments that they do for their suppliers in transitioning. So this is becoming quite interesting now. So please do share what Shell is doing around that.
Thanks, Sam. And first of all, I must compliment the other speakers for their brilliant interventions. I think I learned a lot from their remarks. So you're right, my earlier remarks covered mainly our scope 1 and 2 emissions, but we recognize that these emissions represent only 15% of the overall emissions. So most of the emissions come from our products being used by our customers. And we're not sort of saying that we want to be a net zero emissions company by 2050. We say we are trying to be a net zero emissions business by 2050, which means that we would like to also cover our products in that sort of envelope. And therefore, we have to look at the sectors in which we operate. There are some traditional sectors we operate in, and there are some new sectors. And we have actually created a new business called sectoral decarbonization, which goes deep into these sectors. So the traditional sectors were transport, industry, and power generation sectors. And in these sectors, deep electrification with renewable electricity or use of bioenergy could target the low-hanging fruits. But the significant challenges come in the hard-to-abate sectors, as you rightly pointed out. Let's look at aviation, for example. I mean, aviation is going to be difficult. It needs a high-density fuel. So sustainable aviation fuels is being pursued using biofuels, and also synthetic kerosene, which is essentially using captured carbon and green hydrogen. In fact, Shell responded to a Dutch government challenge on this and provided a consignment of such synthetic kerosene within 3 months. It was used on a KLM flight from Amsterdam to Madrid. Shipping is the other sort of global industry, and to decarbonize shipping, one needs to work with the entire ecosystem and across the globe. What is being considered as the future bunkering fuels is methanol from captured carbon and green hydrogen, again ammonia from green hydrogen. But in the interim, maybe LNG has a role to provide decarbonization, solution. Heavy-duty trucking is an area that again needs energy-dense fuels, and right now LNG and biofuel blends are interim solutions. But before the technology for hydrogen for fuel cell electric vehicle trucks or even battery electrical trucks become viable. But you brought out an interesting element, which is the sort of non-traditional sectors that we have traditionally not been there, because steel, cement, aluminium, etc. They primarily use a lot of coal, and Shell had a coal business till the late 90s, and we exited the coal business. So we don't supply coal to these companies. But their quest for decarbonization opens up new opportunities to not only offer them fuels of low carbon intensity, as was mentioned earlier, but also technology solutions, including a digital backbone for a system-wide optimization on the lines that Rahul actually articulated so well. Afraid I will not be able to divulge too much around the R&D and the commercial models, but suffice to say that we have teams working feverishly on both the technology and commercial bits of this jigsaw.
Sure.
So I'll pause here. Thank you.
So Suman, I'll delve into your earlier avatar as a consultant, right? So in your previous avatar, you were a consultant before you dwelled into pharma and automobiles. So as I'm hearing these technologies, and a lot of names are getting dropped, technologies getting evaluated. If I am a CEO of a company where I have to make a bet on should I bet that India will electrify everything, or should hydrogen will still be relevant? How do I place my bets? Is it always an alternate that I have to weigh, and where do I invest? Because sometimes it's like for a layman, I think Sandeep can say whether I'm going right, but somebody investing in a CDMA technology completely went bankrupt, right? While somebody investing in a GSM, if that's a right analogy. But how do you make these bets? And you are on cusp of some of these bets, Suman. So,
isn't it $1 million question? I wish I had the crystal ball and I could give you the magical answer. But it is a very risk-weighted answer, right? So in our business, for example, you have to always look at cell technology. It is evolving so fast. So, I can just tell you, any day you open, there's a new startup with a new technology which they claim is giving better efficiency than all other technologies in the past. So when we take a bet, of course, because we have to use it on vehicles and they actually need to work and we need to sell them, we are doing it in two ways, right? One is, of course, the dominant technology, where we see there is a supply chain established, there is a value chain, there is ability to establish, let's say, resale value for our vehicles. We go with the dominant technology, which for us is really lithium ion right now. It's going to be there for a few years. But we keep our eyes open on the solid state. We keep our eyes open and do some pilots on the metal layer technologies. aluminum air or some other technology. We'll do some pilots, we'll check it out, I think also, we have to look beyond technology. Technology is only one part of the solution. Like, I'll just give you example in my space right now, because I was a consultant 10 plus years ago, and I'm not going to give you a lot of inputs about that time. But if you look at my space, right, or let's say this electric mobility, technology you can choose, but technology adoption is a function of so much more than just the battery technology. I have to look at the entire ecosystem. So, for example, I'll just tell you, a battery has 80% of its life left after the primary use in electric vehicles. If I just looked at technology and said, okay, this thing will last so long, and therefore we should just choose the longest living technology, that would be a little... it'll be a misstep, right? I need to look at the end of life, right? In between, I must look at second life. I must look at which of these technologies are better suited for second life applications. Is there an ecosystem to give you a second life? Is there a storage? So it can be. Then OEMs are also looking into this. This will be solved through partnerships, but I need to see that is the ecosystem evolving for this particular choice of technology to give the second life. Is there an end of life, or everyone is just going to burn the batteries at the end of life? If people are going to burn the battery, what was the point of shifting to this, right? So we need to invest in that aspect of it as well, recycling and post-useful life. There are only like 100 recycling companies now in the world. We have to figure out which is the technology of recycling that has to be scaled up. So I just think, like someone mentioned, circular economy, a technology choice in itself is just one of the few choices we have to make. In the context of the country or the application that we're using, we need to look at sort of the various value chain aspects and then choose what makes the most economic sense. And as some wise person said, don't make a hole so big that you can't recover from it from your P&L. So you have to take the measured bets. You have to take a risk-adjusted bet. So, you have to take bets, and you will win some and lose some. That is nature of business. But I think just look beyond. We cannot just look at technology. I need to look at the full value chain and to figure out which one is going to get adopted in the country and in the application that I have, and then make bet against that. But I'm sure you will discuss capital subsequently. So it's all about where the money flows is, isn't it?
Correct. And Bill, so over to you. I have been, I think, recently read your CEO making a comment that how you are putting skin in the game in a technology, and then going and even exposing equity exposure to some of those projects. So any thoughts? Please do share how that's been handled.
So a couple of years back, as I said, as we started exploring that we want our balance sheet to look more and more green, one of the initiatives we started was a build, own, operate model under the separate subsidiary, which is named as Thermax On-Site Energy Solutions Limited. And what basically TOSL does is that if you are a customer who wants green energy, we can set up a complete, we supply the boiler, we manage the supply chain, and we deliver hot water or steam to your process needs. And we own and operate that asset for 5, 10, 15 years. So basically we are now completely not only giving you green energy, but it's like you're taking away the whole headache of managing utilities away from you. And Thermax invests into those assets, and then we can give you steam per kg, or we even treat water similarly. So there are several customers with whom we have a 15-year agreement where we treat their entire water requirements for their entire plant, city, manufacturing unit. And we have a build and operate model around that. So that's TOSL, where we can give you steam, hot water, clean water on a per pay use basis, where Thermax owns the asset and we put in our equity in it. And as this business model develops, I'm sure at some point of time, if you want, we can take separate private equity investments also into that model. Continuing on my previous point, some other technologies that are developing right now, which are very exciting. Of course, one is the hydrogen. and there is gray hydrogen, there's blue hydrogen, there's green hydrogen, which I guess everyone's aware of. But it appears more and more that green hydrogen, as more and more companies start to pursue that, and the manufacturing of electrolyzers start to become at a much more larger mass scale, the costs of green hydrogen will start to come down, and at some point of time shipping and trucking becomes viable, and at some point of time industries such as steel, refinery, petrochemicals and cement will become viable as well. So that's the one other interesting thing is fuel cells. I think Suman mentioned about that. Thermax has developed fuel cell technology which has been tested by the Indian Navy and has been successfully adopted by them. And then in terms of cooling, we do a lot of cooling requirements by using waste heat. So that's the other thing. I think Sam has dropped out, so we are left to ourselves, and maybe I should pass on them. Maybe we should just wait for him to join, because we do need a moderator.
I think they are almost out of time now.
Yeah,
and still have 10-15 minutes. Yeah.
At a time when we are talking technology lets us down. so yeah, I mean, that's the nature of this stuff when we look forward. So I was just hearing this about the CDMA versus GSM. I think, and coming from my background, I've been in telecom for a large part of my life. We use the technologies which enable the distribution side of the business. Really, from the customer's point of view, he does not care. As long as he gets power in his light, he does not care what technology is being used behind. And similarly, when I was in telecom, the customer who is really let's say an example of a watchman of the security guard on your on the ground floor, he wants to watch a movie, whether you do 3G, 4G, 5G technologies, he doesn't care. As long as he doesn't get that round box, I think that's what technology means to him. And yeah, good. Sambitosh, you're back. We were having a conversation while you were out.
No, I think it's good. I carry on with the conversation. So, Sandeep, the next question was to you.
To me.
For example, how are you managing the infrastructure from power to now carry with smart meters all the data analytics, right? That's one. And second is, do you face an issue of stranded cost in your businesses? Because I also wanted you to think back on the telecom days that you had, on how you looked at it.
Yeah, so in fact, I was just giving the same telecom analogy in this context. See, from the customer's point of view, technology is just as good as what he gets to use is real user application. The example that I was giving when you joined in was that for a telecom customer, which is largely a typical example, a security guard who sits at the ground floor. For him, he just wants to watch a movie. He does not worry about 2G, 3G, 4G, and all of that. People in the office keep worrying about technologies, and this is exactly the same thing. I think the word is similar when we go to even the power distribution or the power companies. For the customer, as long as you give him reliable, quality power, that's all he cares about. And when you go to smart meters, these are all things which are enabling you to run your business more efficiently, not so much for the customer. Of course, the customer cares only if his life is becoming more informed. And when it's more informed, he can reduce his cost. His life is becoming more comfortable. His life is becoming more convenient, and the customer experience that you are able to deliver to him is making a difference. So to answer your question about the readiness on the grid, about are we ready for the grid and all that, and I think Suman touched upon this, 1%. I think that number is broadly about 4 to 5%. So if tomorrow all the vehicles that are out on the road become electric, then the load on the grid is just about 5 to 6%, which will be an increase. Now that 5 to 6% for a power company is all in a day's play. It just, there is a peak and trough that you see on a daily basis. That's not a challenge. However, people like power companies will have to gear up when all these cars and scooters and three-wheelers come to charging at the same point. I think that's when there is some bit of an engineering required, which the people in my company and people in the power domain are very well equipped to handle. Of course, it's not going to be the same. They will have to deploy smart charging technologies, time of the day, dynamic charging, and those kind of things. And we are building platforms for that. For example, the platform that we have built for our EV charging has capabilities of that nature.
I think we have only 30 seconds. The last word goes to Rahul. I just wanted to understand what happens if technology goes rogue. Now that's one element. We have 30 seconds, so please do share about data privacy, cyber security, all those issues, Rahul.
It's absolutely, a very good question. It's a crucial issue, and especially as we start putting more and more out onto the cloud, this is a problem that everybody is going to face. So cybersecurity will, increasingly continue to play. It's already become critical and crucial, but will continue to play a very large role, because when you have critical systems like power infrastructure, where if it goes down, if the web goes down, it is frustrating right now, but it's still, you can go on with your life for at least a little while. But if the power goes down, and that's subject to cyber attacks, you can have serious issues. So I think standards, cybersecurity, companies, solutions, I think all of that will become increasingly critical in the new ecosystem.
Sure. So with this, I think we will close the panel. As I summarize the view of the panelists, I take back actually 5 things. First, transition journey contains considerable uncertainties, such as the extent of electrification or use of hydrogen in modes of transfer. So key will be to build out scenario-based planning. I think that's what came out from Suman's thing. We need to raise awareness of the technology landscape available, because even with the best of companies, sometimes when we go in touch and connect with them, they don't understand the technology landscape. That's the second one. Initiate pilots and have commitment to scale up. The third is about allocate resources dynamically to the technology which is emerging or reaches cost parity. The fourth is to build a larger alliance ecosystem to spread the outcome stories and to leverage markets for financing. And the last one is we should also ensure technology is sustainable and utilize technology to become more sustainable. And we must do that in a responsible manner, building in proper governance, respecting privacy, and building trust. Thank you all for your participation. Hope you found the conversation useful. Let's stay responsible and stay connected. Thank you all. With that, I'll hand it over to Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the technology glitch, but we really ended up having a fabulous panel just now. And thank you, Sam, and all the panelists. I think we are coming to the end of day 2, which has built really well on what day 1 spoke about. We started off with having the minister really set out on what the government wants to do, targeting net zero, highlighted the temperature challenge of 3 degrees if we did nothing about it, talked about our commitments at COP26, the challenges between developing and developed countries, and really implored the chamber and everyone else to play their part as we actually try to deal with this on a go-forward basis. We then had Arun Kumar and Narayanan Ramaswamy really talk about where ESG and corporate India is positioned. I think I liked the comment which talked about the fact that ESG could be as transformative in the coming few years as what digital has done. And again, drawing parallels to the pandemic and the fact that, vaccines today need to be more equitable in the context of net zero, climate change, and what we need to do living in one planet on that. But whilst we talked about the need to measure and also develop metrics, there was a recognition that we were very much in the early stages of building awareness, and a lot had to be done in adapting and actually implementing about it. Our panel on making net zero real really built on the 5 elements, talked about the fact that, look, whilst we were 4% of emissions and 17% of the world's population, we were nowhere near the peak of what we're going to consume. Whilst the target of 2070 was, the panelists talked about being very achievable, the challenges of 2030 being more nearer term in our growth cycle, and what's the roadmap to that, was something that I think was recognized as needing to be better put out for us all to achieve on that. Again, a few other key phrases which I took away. Sustainability and development are not mutually exclusive. The cost of taking action versus the cost of not taking action. What quality versus cost 30 years ago is maybe what sustainability is today. And also the examples of the cost of waste to energy versus the cost of coal-fired energy. How the trade-off between that and how the cost is computed and how the benefits are computed is something that we probably have to look at more holistically as we embrace different technologies in different ways of trying to build a more sustainable world. Also, I think recognizing that as innovation plays out and scale builds up and technology emerges, the cost of that and the affordability of that actually comes in. In terms of climate financing, I took away the fact that there probably is more supply today, or supply is not an issue of money. It's actually finding the right projects. So if you have a good project, if you are a good company, if you want to raise finance, I think money is not the issue on that. Also, I think the recognition that it is not going to flip from 0 to 1, but the whole transition finance is actually something that, is recognized on that. And then the role of government in framing policy. What can we learn from solar developed and how India, has taken a leading position on that? How the pharma industry, right from product patent to process patent, and how the whole evolution of regulation helped actually us leapfrog on that. Clearly, we need a roadmap in the shorter term, more importantly than the roadmap into the longer term, because it's the interim milestones that will help us get to the final, milestone on that. Also recognizing that if there is 2 Indias, there's India and Bharat, how can rural India, be a part of this? Also, if there is scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, how does MSMEs in the supply chain actually play their part? And how do large corporates and government help actually MSMEs work through that? The fireside chat on resilience made us recognize that actually, whilst we do something on net zero, the whole climate impact and the damage that can do, be it in terms of drought or in terms of floods, and how businesses bounce back to that are relevant. And how can we actually contribute to reduce some of that? And again, I think the whole waste management example, how, companies as a whole, how us individuals as well can play their part. Technology, I think the last panel brought it all together in such a nice way to say that if we as a country want to be net zero by 2070, we are going to be building blocks of corporates, of individuals, and we saw how various companies had targets, were doing things, and actually were bringing technologies, products, solutions to life. So really, really good end to that all. I'd like to say I took away a lot of different insights from today. I have a lot of notes. I think certainly day 2 helped in building awareness. It helped in actually showing what good looks like. And I hope you took away a bunch of insights as well. Thank you very much to all the panelists for today.